There was a sudden explosion at the street food stall and Sandy got badly burned, while I just hurt my arm. As the doctor dressed my wound, he said, "Not every day you find someone willing to risk it all for their husband nowadays. You should cherish that." I just smiled without saying a word because the moment of the explosion, Sandy clearly let go of my hand and rushed into the flames to protect someone else. Later, she explained, "Saving people is a doctor's instinct." I've known Sandy for 7 years and always trusted her completely. If the person she risked her life to save hadn't been Eric, I might have believed her. 7 years of knowing her, 3 years of marriage. A sudden explosion finally made me realize that the person Sandy would give her life for was no longer me. On our wedding anniversary, Sandy surprisingly had some free time and said she'd take me out for something good to eat. Since Sandy started her own business, it had been ages since we strolled around like this. She took me to a night market and we sat down at a barbecue stand. I looked at her, puzzled, because my stomach's not great and she never let me eat spicy foods. If I snuck some, she'd get mad, saying I didn't take care of myself. Looking at the spicy skewers in front of me, I figured Sandy must have been too busy lately and forgot about these details. My stomach wasn't feeling great today, but I didn't want to spoil the mood, so I ate a little. Through the steam, Sandy was sweating as she ate. "Mike, have some more. Sometimes, the best food is hidden in these little street stalls. Look at how lively it is." "What's that called?" "Oh, yeah, a slice of life." I nodded and smiled, taking the beef skewer she handed me. I was a bit confused about celebrating our anniversary at a street stand, but what surprised me more was Sandy, who was usually so reserved, talking about this slice of life. Looking at her, I suddenly felt like this person I'd spent 7 years sleeping next to seemed a little unfamiliar. Just then, there was a booming sound as flames shot high into the sky. Before I realized what happened, a wave of heat hit me. Instinctively, I reached for Sandy's hand, but in the next instant, she shook me off and dashed toward the center of the flames. "Sandy!" My body trembled, and my shouts sounded off, but Sandy acted like she couldn't hear and rushed toward someone off to the side, protecting them fiercely. That's when people finally reacted. A street food stall exploded, and the patrons and staff inside were severely hurt or worse. We were sitting by the street, separated from the storefront by a sidewalk, so our injuries weren't as bad. Sandy emerged, weak but carrying someone she'd sheltered, with her shirt burned away on her back and arms, revealing patches of raw burns. Panicked, I wanted to check her injuries, but froze when I saw who was beside her, Eric. Eric, pale and trembling uncontrollably, was squatting there, utterly shocked. "It's okay, now, it's okay, Eric." Sandy gently patted his back, comforting him, ignoring her own wounds completely. Eric, calmed by Sandy's words, started crying when he noticed her burns. "What do we do? What do we do? Sandy, you're hurt so bad." He reached out his shaking hand, hesitating to touch the wounds, finally resting it on her face with worry and guilt. "I'm fine, as long as you're okay. Good thing I came today," Sandy said, seeming to suddenly remember me, and frantically looked around. Spotting me not far away, she awkwardly pulled away from Eric and walked over to me. "Mike, are you okay?" She nervously grabbed my hand, her eyes scanning me over before settling on my bleeding arm. Following her gaze, I finally noticed my arm was cut and bleeding. Before that, I didn't even feel the pain. Well, physical pain seemed trivial compared to the emotional pain. "Are you hurt, Mike? Does it hurt?" She frowned, wanting to help with my wound. I stepped back, dodging the hands that had just held someone else. Sandy was startled by my reaction, looking up at me in surprise. Eric stumbled over, and with a hint of surprise, said, "Mike, you're here too?" "What? Am I not supposed to be here?" He realized he messed up and quickly tried to explain. "No, I come here every week to teach dance, just happened to be passing by, didn't expect you guys liked eating here." His excuses were all over the place, but I just smiled at him, deliberately ignoring Sandy's worried gaze. We were so unlucky today, especially with Sandy hurt so badly. Mentioning Sandy, his eyes teared up as he looked over her wounds again with concern. The ambulance arrived, and Eric urged Sandy to get her burns treated first. Sandy stared at me, saying, "I'm okay, Mike's bleeding, he needs to get bandaged first." Helping me onto the ambulance, she didn't spare Eric another glance. An injured old man on the ambulance commented. This young lady dashed over immediately, holding her partner tightly. "You see these two, they're such a loving couple." Because of that, stories of Sandy bravely protecting her husband spread among the injured, and people looked at us with knowing smiles. No one noticed that the person she saved wasn't even me. I neither confirmed nor denied it, but Sandy sat restlessly. "Mike, saving people is just a doctor's instinct, you know that." I wasn't thinking much at the time. Sandy quietly explained, leaning in. I suddenly wanted to laugh, so I did. "Instinct, huh?" It reminded me of when Sandy and I first met. An electric bike almost hit me, and she pushed me away, getting a scrape on her own leg. I was so worried I nearly cried, but she comforted me. When danger comes, saving the one you love is just instinct. Besides, I'm tough. If it hit you, you might have broken something. Her face turned red as she reassured me, getting bashful by the end. Back then, I thought Sandy was someone I could spend my life with. But loving each other is easy. Staying together is hard. In the end, someone who once instinctively loved me with their life would do the same for someone else. Maybe my laughter was too sarcastic, but Sandy got angry and embarrassed. Mike, what do you mean? Are you doubting Eric and me? Others might not know, but you do. When Tina left, Eric was the one she worried about most. They were about to get married, if not for. Sandy trailed off, her face pained. I knew she was lost in those painful memories again. That fire has been burning fiercely in her heart, never extinguished. I met Sandy through a rather awkward damsel in distress situation. One time, I accidentally stepped into a roadside drain, and my leg got a huge cut from some glass. I had no choice but to call an ambulance. Sandy was the one who responded. She picked out the glass shards with tweezers and, trying to soothe my fears, gently covered my head with her coat, whispering reassuringly. She even took me to the hospital afterward. Sandy had always been gentle, and that afternoon was when I first felt moved by her. Later, she asked for my contact information, and a year later, we naturally ended up together. Initially, my parents were against it. According to them, Sandy was great, but as my parents, they had to think of me. Sandy's job was too risky. They didn't want me to face that kind of danger. Eventually, my parents' worries came true. It was a wildfire that burned for nearly half a month. Every firefighter in the city was deployed to the front line, and as a doctor, Sandy was also sent to help. Sandy, being the head of the medical team, was tasked with finding injured people. Due to the rough terrain, she split the team into 3 groups for a point-by-point search. But even though the fire pocket in front was out, the smoke got thicker. Sandy realized something was wrong, but visibility was poor. She sent team member Tina away from the fire line up the mountain to check it out. After Tina left, the wildfire flared back up and exploded. Sandy ordered everyone to evacuate. It was only then she realized the wind had changed direction, and the fire was closing in from the other side. The summit was covered in thick black smoke, and there was no sign of Tina. Sandy desperately tried to rush up the mountain, but the team eventually had to drag her down. That wildfire claimed the lives of over 10 doctors, including Tina. Later, Sandy tearfully told me she was the youngest girl on our team. She was supposed to get married to her fiancé in a month. It was me, I got her killed. Even though the hospital's investigation concluded that the fire's rapid change wasn't Sandy's fault, she couldn't get over it and resigned. At Tina's funeral, we met Eric for the first time, a striking but fragile-looking guy. Halfway through the service, he fainted and ended up in the hospital. Later, I learned that after Tina's death, he didn't eat or drink. He just sat in their wedding room dazed. I heard he and Tina were childhood sweethearts. Eric's mother has a mental illness, and initially, Tina's parents disapproved. But after 10 years of dating, they won over their parents and were set to marry. Fate can be really cruel sometimes, shattering everything just before happiness arrives. Looking at Eric on the hospital bed, tears silently streamed down my cheeks. My heart felt like it was breaking. With Eric's parents absent, Sandy took care of all the hospital arrangements, discussed treatments with doctors, and inquired about precautions. The doctor said Eric had strong suicidal tendencies and needed psychological intervention, but he needed to cooperate. Sandy, who never liked flowers, brought a bunch of daisies into his room. She said to Eric seriously, "Tina always loved having these on the table. We teased her about it all the time, and she always blushed, saying you loved daisies. They were as vibrant and resilient as you." We used to joke, but deep down, we envied her for having a loved one like that. Tina's gone, and I have an unavoidable responsibility for it. I haven't been able to sleep. It's a living hell. Eric, if you want to go find her, let's go together. Eric looked up, startled. I was shocked in the corner. Sandy, I've learned about the incident. It wasn't your fault. You have family and loved ones. How could you? Sandy tucked the flowers into Eric's arms. You also have family and loved ones. Tina would want you to live strongly, wherever she is. If we're not going to find her, let's get therapy together. The doctor had long recommended therapy for Sandy, but she refused every time. I never expected she'd consider it for Eric's sake. Holding the flowers, Eric finally found his outlet and broke down in sobs. He cried till exhaustion took over for the whole afternoon. When I came back with dinner, Eric was sound asleep. Sandy gestured for me to be quiet as she carefully pulled the blanket over Eric and left the room. She smiled and said he agreed to therapy at last. That was the first time she smiled since the incident. Why did you say such a thing? Saying you'd go find Tina scared me to death. I scolded. I was lying to him. Sandy's eyes flickered. But back then, I thought everything Sandy was doing was just showing her responsibility as a doctor. I never doubted her for a moment. That day, Sandy explained a lot to me, and I listened without arguing. Her injuries were severe, and she needed to stay in the hospital. I, as usual, ran between home and the hospital to take care of her. On Sandy's 3rd day in the hospital, Eric showed up. I had made soup at home and rushed to the room, only to see through the window that Eric was feeding Sandy bite by bite. If some food got on the edge of her lips, Eric would naturally wipe it for her with a tissue. They were chatting, all smiles, in a caring way. I stood outside holding the lunchbox for a long time, afraid I'd break whatever atmosphere was inside, or afraid my suspicions were true. Then I heard Eric, in a timid voice, ask, "Sandy, if you could do it all over, would you still leave Mike and come running to me?" Sandy looked straight into Eric's eyes, and after a moment of silence, said, "Eric, just remember this, you'll never get hurt as long as I'm here." "But Mike," Eric started to speak but stopped. Hearing my name, Sandy hesitated and then quietly said, "I just want you to live, really live." Eric hugged Sandy tightly and started crying. I know everything. Just promise you won't do something so reckless again. Seeing you hurt scared the life out of me. I'm terrified of losing you too. I've already died once before. I can't bear you leaving me like Tina did." By the end, he was sobbing uncontrollably, and Sandy was visibly moved, her eyes moist. The attending nurse came in to change the dressing and pushed the door open, ignoring me standing outside. I froze at the doorway, caught off guard and not knowing where to hide. It felt like an execution was taking place in this small hospital room, and I was the prisoner tied to the scaffold waiting for my sentence. I wanted to scream at them about their closeness, to cry and shout about Sandy's betrayal, to rush in like the wife in some soap opera and confront them, but I suddenly felt drained of all energy. Even my breathing was heavy. In the end, I couldn't say a word and turned away, fleeing in panic. Sandy shouted my name loudly behind me, wanting to come after me, but the nurse changing Eric's bandage stopped her. It wasn't until I rushed out the hospital doors that I realized my face was wet with tears. The soup I'd been holding had spilled completely, like the 7 years of feelings I'd poured into our relationship. My clothes were soaked with the soup, greasy and dark yellow. I suddenly felt my stomach churn and bent over, retching violently. Sandy's calls kept coming in over and over, and with trembling hands, I kept hanging up. I didn't know what I was afraid of. Was it Sandy's likely false explanations, or the fear that I'd misjudged my 7 years of genuine feelings? I hated my own cowardice and Sandy's deceit. If she loved Eric so much, why pretend to love me? Why let me live in a false sense of happiness? I didn't go home. I found a hotel, took a scalding shower, and passed out into a deep sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a painfully quiet world. While everyone else was asleep, my mind was intensely clear. There were over 100 missed calls on my phone, not just from Sandy, but my parents too. There were also messages from Sandy on Message, but I was too tired to open them until I saw a message from Eric. "Mike, I'm sorry. After Tina left, I was almost like a dead man. It was Sandy who brought me back to life. We didn't know how to tell you. Ultimately, it's our fault. The glaring we and you made it clear I was the odd one out in this whole affair." I opened Eric's Facebook and realized his previously empty page was now filled with posts. I thought he'd been too traumatized to share anything. Turns out, he just blocked me all along. The most recent post was a photo of Sandy's injured back, captioned, "I'm scared you'll leave me too. I don't know what I'd do without you." Sandy commented, "Don't overthink it. Sleep early." Scrolling back, there was a photo of a barbecue, captioned, "Eating street food with someone you like is the best kind of happiness." The hand in the photo was still wearing our wedding ring. I masochistically looked through Eric's Facebook from beginning to end, like watching a grand romance unfold. Only the leads were him and Sandy. Memories started flooding back. Those hints all pointed to Sandy's infidelity. Sandy quit her job and started her own business, and we got married 3 years ago. On our wedding day, Sandy drank a lot, and surprisingly, so did Eric. His Facebook post that day read, "She said she wants to be fair to others, but who's going to be fair to me?" He drank too much and broke down crying. Everyone thought he was just emotional, but now I know it was because of Sandy. Sandy left during the reception. When I sent him home, I was a bit upset, but ever since Tina passed, Sandy had been especially caring toward Eric. I thought she was just trying to make amends. After marriage, Sandy got busier. I never demanded her company to support her business. The only time was on our anniversary. I prepared dinner and let Sandy know ahead of time. But no matter how long I waited and reheated the food, Sandy never came back. I sat in the living room until dawn before Sandy rushed back. She seemed surprised I was still awake. "Mike, why aren't you sleeping yet?" "Sorry, my phone died." Eric called suddenly saying he wasn't feeling well. I went to the hospital with him. You know his parents aren't nearby, so there's no one else to help. She kissed my forehead, reheated the meal herself, and held my hand, saying the day's not over until sunrise. That night, we had a candlelit dinner in the quiet morning hours. Sandy held me and said, "Mike, you've had it tough being with me. Once the company is stable, I'll take you anywhere you want to go, and be with you every day." These empty promises were enough to make someone in love feel a false sense of bliss. I knew Sandy couldn't always be with me, yet I drowned in her tender love like a bubbling fool. But now I realize that night Sandy did go to the hospital with Eric, only he was crying to the point of a panic attack. Eric's Facebook had a photo of his bandaged hand, captioned, "I know you don't belong to me, yet I selfishly hoped you'd stay. It's my fault for overestimating." Sandy commented, "Sorry. I'd rather you'd have hit me than cry till you're sick." Those were the same words Sandy said to me. It was after she got pregnant for the first time. Severe morning sickness led to low blood sugar. Before she passed out, Sandy struggled to call me, but I didn't answer for a long time. By the time she wanted to call Dad, she was too weak. In the end, because she didn't get medical attention quickly, we lost the baby after 2 months. The doctor said it was nature's way of selection and assured us we were still young with many chances ahead. I cried every day back then, and Sandy couldn't bear to see it. Hugging me, she said, "I'm sorry. I'd rather have you hit me than cry yourself sick. Mike, listen to me. We'll have more kids." I'll never forget that day, so when I saw Eric's Facebook post, it hit me. Sandy had left him to come home that night. His previously private Facebook was now open to me. I knew his intentions, but couldn't help but fall into the trap until my stomach convulsed again, and I found myself heaving uncontrollably. After throwing up the last bits of food in my stomach, all that came out was bitter, acidic liquid. Suddenly, my vision went black, and I started breaking out in a cold sweat. I struggled to grab my phone and skipped over Sandy's pinned message to call my dad. In the doctor's office, the doctor held the report and asked, "Are you sick?" When I hesitated and didn't say anything, her attitude became even colder. "Decide when to have the surgery, then we can talk about the treatment plan." My parents were anxiously saying from behind, "The sooner, the better, doctor." Looking at their worried faces, I stayed quiet and listened to the doctor's instructions. Since this was my first serious illness, the doctor suggested I get admitted to the hospital for 4 fluids to stabilize my blood sugar and then slowly adjust from there. To avoid worrying my parents, I didn't tell them about the incident that triggered everything, so they informed Sandy and her parents. Sandy practically stormed into the hospital room, her eyes red, heading straight for a hug when she saw me. "Mike, why didn't you tell me you were sick? I've been worried sick these past few days." She noticed our parents in the room, hesitating to say more. "You better take good care of Mike this time. If anything happens to him, I'll hold you responsible," Sandy's dad said. Sandy's mom nudged him. "Stop saying nonsense. Everything will be just fine and safe this time. Divorce is messier than a breakup because it involves not just 2 people, but 2 families. Sandy's parents have always been good to me. Watching the 4 parents now, I felt a bitterness I couldn't express. "Dad, Mom, I'm fine. It's late. Why don't you head home?" I forced a smile. After Sandy sent everyone off, she came back with my favorite porridge. "Mike, I'm going to take care of you properly this time. Don't act like a child, alright? I was about to lose my mind when I couldn't find you." She cooled the porridge and carefully brought it to my mouth, just like before. I didn't open my mouth, I just stared into her eyes. Eventually, my gaze made her feel uneasy, and she made an excuse to go wash some fruit to turn away. "You couldn't find me, so then you decided to watch Eric's performance, right?" Eric's social media post today was him on stage in a performance outfit, holding flowers. The caption read, "Dancing under the gaze of love is the happiest thing in my life." I had just liked the post moments ago. Sandy stopped in her tracks and suddenly looked up, disbelief in her eyes. "Mike, did you snoop on my phone?" There wasn't any guilt or apology, just accusation. Why do women always think they can hide things perfectly in such situations? Sandy's reaction was the same as any unfaithful woman, flustered and irate. I raised my own phone and said, "You didn't think only you could see his everyday posts, did you?" Sandy panicked. She opened her mouth a few times to explain, but ultimately said nothing, realizing even she didn't believe her own excuses. Speaking them would just be ridiculous. "Let's get a divorce." I'd rehearsed this line in my mind countless times, and finally, I could say it calmly. Sandy suddenly kneeled at the side of my bed, frantically saying, Mike, I still love you. I really do. I'm begging you, don't leave me." She tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away. "Sandy, how long do you plan to keep lying? Why not just tell me you fell for someone else? Are you afraid I'd hold on to you and not let go? You keep saying you love me, but then what is Eric to you? You're absolutely disgusting to me." Even though I tried hard to suppress it, my last question came out with a hint of tears. I always hoped not to lose too badly in the end, but I forgot I'd already lost everything in this marriage. Hearing me mention Eric, Sandy grabbed her hair in pain and lowered her head in defeat. He's Tina's fiancé. When Tina passed away, Sandy, are you lying to me or yourself? Do you really think you're just taking care of your friend's fiancé? Taking care of him all the way to bed? I interrupted her pale excuse. "I'm sorry, Mike, I'm really sorry. At first, I just wanted to do right by my friend who passed. So, I did whatever Eric needed. You know, don't you?" Eric was severely depressed, so much so he couldn't even act. Watching him slowly come back to life made me feel like I was repaying Tina, little by little. Later, I found I was thinking about him every day, wanting him to be happier and healthier. By the time I realized our feelings had changed, it was already too late. Eric had fallen for me. Losing Tina had already broken him once. I couldn't push him into darkness again. He's fragile, like glass. I just couldn't push him away. He'd die. I know I made a huge mistake, but I was too scared to confess to you. I didn't want to lose you, to lose our home. Mike, please give me a chance. I'll try to explain things to Eric. No matter the cost, I'll try to make it right with him. I listened quietly to Sandy's explanation, unable to understand why she was so persistent, even after I had let go. Before I could respond, a wave of pain hit, and I rushed to the bathroom to throw up. Sandy followed me, patting my back and offering water. Just then, her phone rang. After a moment's hesitation, she still picked it up. "Mike, Eric's in trouble. I have to go see him. Wait for me, and I'll come back to explain everything." Sandy left the hospital in a hurry after saying that. I turned on my phone and saw Eric's post again. "The dream of this world is awakening, and I should be leaving too." The picture was of a bleeding wrist. I turned off my phone and went to find my doctor to schedule the earliest surgery available for tomorrow. I didn't care if Eric was truly depressed or just acting. Sandy's choice had already given me the answer. Now, I wanted nothing more to do with Sandy. It was precisely because I had loved her so completely before that I felt especially disgusted now. Perhaps a social media post wasn't direct enough for his taste because Eric sent me a message this time. Mike, I can't live without Sandy. Please, I'm begging you, let us be. Without Sandy, I'd die, and she'd love me forever, just like she loved Tina. I don't know what Sandy said to him, but Eric probably thinks I don't want to let go. I ignored it, feeling sad because I would be having surgery the next morning without anyone by my side. I remembered Sandy telling my parents that I was the most precious person to her and that she would protect me with her life. My parents agreed, and as soon as we stepped out, she took my hand and ran like a child, shouting without a care for her image. I'm going to marry Mike. I'm going to marry Mike. I think she really loved me back then, but the girl who once cheered and loved me had changed in the end. I didn't sleep all night, and Sandy didn't return. At 7 a.m., I was wheeled into the operating room alone. Cold anesthesia flowed into my body, and I ended the relationship with my own hands. Strangely enough, even though I couldn't feel my body, it was my heart that felt crushed. The stainless steel tools digging within me seemed to empty my very soul. After the surgery, I hobbled to the recovery room almost bent over. In my somewhat sick state, I waited for the anesthesia to wear off, hoping the pain might lessen some of my guilt. When the nurse left, I saw Sandy standing silently at the door. It's over, Sandy, I told her. She looked at me incredulously and then slowly crouched, clutching her head in tears. Mike, why didn't you wait for me to come back? I said I'd sort it out, Mike. She shouted in despair and seemed ready to rush over and question me until seeing my pale face, she raised her hand and slapped herself hard. You should go. I'll mail the divorce papers to your office later. We can split the assets however it should be. At least we don't have kids. My wound throbbed painfully, my voice trembled uncontrollably, and the smile I forced out felt weak and bitter. After a long while, she looked up, her eyes full of pleading. Mike, I'm sorry. I just want you to be okay. I've already talked it out with Eric. Can we not get divorced, please? Sandy's voice sounded sincere and humble, but it made my stomach turn. Sandy, let's just keep some dignity. I don't mind a courtroom confrontation if you don't want both our parents to be embarrassed. Or do you want a larger share? It seemed like she finally realized I wasn't just throwing a tantrum. Wait for me. With those ambiguous words, she decisively walked out. After Sandy left, my parents came to see me. I opened up and told them everything that had happened recently. They went from angry to heartbroken. My mom held me while crying, and my dad kept sighing. Mike, come back home with me. We can talk about everything back at home. I nodded through my tears, finally letting out all my grievances in my mom's embrace. After being discharged from the hospital, I went straight home. The divorce papers, drafted by my lawyer, had already been sent to Sandy's office. She didn't reach out to me again, but my dad did call her parents and gave them a piece of his mind. I heard Sandy's father was so upset that he fainted and had to be hospitalized, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Once my health fully recovered, I informed Sandy and headed back to what used to be our home together to pack my things. No matter who ended up with the property, I didn't want to live there with all its nauseating memories. Our massive wedding photo by the bed showed us grinning ear to ear. In the drawer, there was still the journal we wrote together when we were madly in love. What used to be a cozy little nest now seemed nothing but sarcastic. I packed up my documents and clothes, ready to leave. While I was getting my things, I heard the door open. Thinking Sandy had returned, I was about to discuss the divorce process with her. But it was Eric who walked in. Eric wasn't surprised to see me, as if he had known I'd be there that day. Even though Sandy and I weren't officially divorced yet, seeing him there so comfortably really irked me. I believed there was no need to insist on one person in a relationship, but seeing his brazen demeanor angered me. Before Sandy and I are divorced, shouldn't you knock first? I said coldly, not caring how harsh my tone sounded. Eric looked up at me, not offended, but with a determined look in his eyes. Mike, I backed off 3 years ago and let Sandy marry you. I agonized over it for 3 years, and now we're even. You tying Sandy down with marriage won't give you the outcome you desire. Let her go. I thought Eric must feel some guilt towards me, or at least the shame of being the third party. Little did I expect he thought of my and Sandy's marriage as something he graciously allowed. I sneered internally, looking at him as I replied, Eric, when Tina had her accident, Sandy and I put in so much effort to help you move on. If you still have a conscience, you shouldn't repay me like this. Hearing this, Eric seemed distressed for a moment, his face paling as he recalled the past. I can't help it, I really can't. Tina left, and then Sandy showed up. Isn't that fate? Sandy said she wanted to take care of me for Tina. If it wasn't for you, if you didn't exist 3 years ago, it would have been me marrying her. Whenever he mentioned Tina, he always became uncontrollably emotional. Sometimes I even wondered if he loved Sandy or if she was just a stand-in for Tina. You think all Sandy feels for me is responsibility and guilt? To be honest, I sent Sandy the divorce papers ages ago. It's her who hasn't responded. I have no clue why. Do you? Eric naively thought he was the perfect victim, that my existence was the only barrier keeping him and Sandy from being together. Hearing my words, there was finally a crack in his previously composed face. He glared at me intensely and spat out, "No way. It's you. You wouldn't divorce her. That's why Sandy said she wanted to break up with me and offer me compensation." Compensation? She actually said she'd give me compensation. My Tina would never do that to me, so how could Sandy? He grew more agitated, his whole body shaking fiercely. I picked up my things, ready to leave. "Tell Sandy I'll be waiting for her at the Civil Affairs office next Monday." Saying that, I tried to walk past Eric to the door, but he yanked me back, gripping me tightly. "What do you mean? You think Sandy loves you? I'm telling you, she loves me. She loves only me, just like Tina. Just like on the day of the explosion, she rushed to me." Eric seemed crazed, and despite his frail appearance, he had an unbelievable grip on me. Out of his backpack, he pulled out a clear glass bottle. "Time's almost up." He glanced at the clock on the wall and said. Then, he shoved me back onto the sofa and threw the glass bottle in his hand at the door with all his might. It shattered with a crisp sound, and the strong smell of alcohol hit my nose. Then he pulled out a lighter with trembling hands, looked at me, and said, "Guess who she'll save, you or me?" The elevator chimed, and Sandy called my name as she came upstairs. "Mike, watch out." As soon as she said it, flames shot up. Eric didn't bring a lot of alcohol, but he poured it all by the door, and now the flames blocked the way out. Escaping seemed impossible. Amidst the scorching heat and blinding smoke, Eric shouted Sandy's name frantically. "Sandy, save me. I'm here. You said you'd never let me get hurt if you were around, Sandy." I pulled him into the bathroom with me, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I didn't want to watch someone burn to death right in front of me. "Mike, she will save me," Eric said with surety in his eyes. "She'll save you. She'll save you. You have to live for her to save you, you crazy person," I yelled impatiently. I regretted engaging with him earlier. Who knew Eric would go this far? I didn't doubt Sandy would save him. She'd done it before. I pulled down a towel, soaked it thoroughly, wrapped it around myself, and dialed emergency services. The only thing in my mind was saving myself. Just then, Sandy burst through the door. Through the smoke, she grabbed me, wrapped me in a fire blanket, and helped me stand. "Sandy, Sandy, I'm here." Eric's voice faded in and out behind us, but Sandy didn't stop. All I felt was the intense heat and choking air around us. "Hang in there, Mike, you're doing great," Sandy said with strained effort from above me. I suddenly remembered the fire drill Sandy had done with me before. When there's a fire, hide in the bathroom and wait for rescue. That day she rushed into the bathroom and carried me out, just like today, only back then we were laughing and joking. We never thought this day would actually come. Finally, she got me to a safe place outside. By then, the medics had arrived. Sandy's clothes were burnt, showing raw red wounds on her body. Wrapped in the fire blanket, I was mostly okay, just coughing a little. I stared at Sandy, still trying to figure out why she saved me first. She seemed to understand the confusion in my eyes, smiled, and said, "Mike, I'm sorry. I love you." She seemed to want to hug me, but her hand stopped midway and slowly dropped. Then she turned around and rushed back into the flames. Sandy and Eric were carried out by doctors later. They were unconscious from the smoke inhalation. The fire was put out, and fortunately, damages were limited to just our place. 3 days later, at the hospital, I, having been rescued in time, could be discharged after 3 days of observation and treatment. Eric had also woken up. Sandy, however, was still in a coma. The doctors said she was severely injured, and saving her was a miracle. She might be permanently disabled. I stood by her hospital bed for a long time, repeatedly recalling the last words she said to me. Maybe they were true. But time has passed, and we can't go back. Relationships are one thing in this world that can't be reversed. When Sandy's parents saw me, they were emotional, telling me Sandy was sorry and asking me to give her a chance. I smiled at them and said, "Uncle, Auntie, we can't be together anymore. It's not that I'm not giving her a chance. I can't give myself one." Outside the hospital, the police met me. After learning what had happened, they said Eric had been repeating 3 words since he woke up: "Save me first." The doctor said he needed a psychological assessment. The police looked at me with sympathy. After all, having your house set on fire by someone mentally ill is pretty unlucky. The day the assessment results came out, Sandy woke up after 10 days in a coma. When I went to see Sandy, it was afternoon. She was alone, leaned against the headrest in her quiet hospital room. The late afternoon glow cast a warm and gentle light on her. Seeing me, she smiled and waved, calling my name just like before. "Mike, you're here." I sat gently on the chair by her bed, arranging the fruit I'd brought. "Look at today's sunset. It's beautiful. Reminds me of the sunsets we watched at the beach." "Sandy, she raised her hand gently, cutting me off, and took out a stack of papers from the drawer, handing them to me. It was the signed divorce papers. "Once I'm discharged, we'll go to the marriage bureau." She smiled warmly like she was talking about taking me to some snack place once she's out. "Mike deserves a better life, and for my mistakes, I'll make amends myself." Leaving Sandy's hospital room that day felt like saying goodbye to a longtime friend. Not too sad, but there was a lingering sense of loss. After all, those memories woven with Sandy would take a while to forget. Eric's assessment results came out, confirming his mental illness. He wouldn't face criminal charges. The police contacted Eric's family to discuss civil compensation. The day he was in a wheelchair, he kept telling his parents he was getting married, but the bride in his mind kept switching between Tina and Sandy. His parents, frail with age, tiredly wiped their tears as they pushed him along. After Tina left, he was already troubled. We never thought he'd go this far to harm others. Though we're not capable, we'll do our best to compensate. Since that property was shared between Sandy and me, the police also contacted Sandy. In the end, Sandy gave me all her assets except for the property and declined compensation from Eric's parents. I guess that's the compensation she meant. Eric was sent to a mental hospital. That once vibrant boy will spend the rest of his life behind locked doors. The day we got the divorce papers was bright and sunny. Sandy was waiting at the civil affairs office, just like on the day we got married years ago. "You're late," she smiled. "Sorry, there was traffic," I replied. We chatted like old friends, surprising even the staff with how we were. In the divorce registry office, our calmness seemed out of place. "Mike, can we still be friends?" "Better not, I've got plenty of friends," I said. "Don't need another." Upon receiving the divorce papers, I felt a sense of relief. I was me again, a new Mike. Just walking down the street, I'd carefully avoid drainage grates. After all, you must walk this path cautiously. One misstep can lead to a heavy price. Sandy, Eric, and I all learned this the hard way.